Teaching and Practice. Chapter 1. Yasutani Rashi's Introductory Lectures on Zen Training. Editor's Introduction. Westerners eager to practice Zen yet lacking access to a qualified master have always faced an imposing handicap: the dearth of written information on what Zazen is and how to begin and carry it on. Nor is this lack confined to English and other European languages. In the writings of the ancient Chinese and Japanese Zen masters which have come down to us, there is little on the theory of Zazen or on the relation of the practice of Zazen to enlightenment. Neither is there much detailed information on such elementary matters as sitting postures, the regulation of the breath, concentration of the mind, and the incidence of visions and sensations of an illusory nature.
There is nothing strange in this. Sitting in Zazen or meditation has been so accepted as the approved path to spiritual emancipation throughout Asia that no Zen Buddhist had first to be convinced that through it one could develop one's powers of concentration, achieve unification and tranquility of mind, and eventually, if one's aspiration was pure and strong enough, come to self-realization. An aspirant, therefore, was simply given a few oral instructions on how to fold the legs, how to regulate the breath, and how to concentrate the mind. Through the painful process of trial and error and periodic encounters, dokusen, with one's teacher, one eventually learned in a thoroughly experiential way not only proper sitting and breathing but also the inner meaning and purpose of Zazen.
But since modern people, as Yasutani Rashi points out, lack the faith and burning zeal of their predecessors in Zen, they need a map their mind can trust, charting their entire spiritual journey, before they can move ahead with confidence. For these reasons Harada Rashi, Yasutani Rashi's own master, devised a series of introductory lectures on Zen practice some years ago, and it is this material which forms the basis of these lectures by Yasutani Rashi. This present translation is a compilation of a number of such lectures which Yasutani Rashi has given, without notes, to beginners over the past several years. No new student may receive dokusen until he or she has heard them all.
These talks are more than a compendium of instructions on the formal aspects of Zazen, that is, sitting, breathing, and concentration. They are an authoritative exposition of the 5 levels of Zen, of the aims and essentials of Zazen, and of the all-important relation of Zazen to enlightenment, Satori. With them as map and compass, earnest seekers need not grope along hazardous bypaths of the occult, the psychic, or the superstitious, which waste time and often prove harmful, but can proceed directly along a carefully charted course, secure in the knowledge of their ultimate goal.
No account of the history and development of Zen, no interpretations of Zen from the viewpoint of philosophy or psychology, and no evaluations of the influence of Zen on archery, judo, haiku poetry, or any other of the Japanese arts will be found here. Valuable as these studies can be, they have no legitimate place in Zen training and would only burden aspirants' minds with ideas that would confuse them as to their aims and drain them of the incentive to practice. For this reason such studies are deliberately omitted by Yasutani Rashi. Yasutani Rashi's emphasis on the religious aspect of Zen Buddhism,
that is, on faith as a prerequisite to enlightenment, may come as a surprise to Western readers accustomed to intellectual images of Zen by scholars devoid of Zen insight. This derives for the most part from the teachings of Dogen Zenji, one of the imposing religious personalities of Japanese history, who brought the doctrines of the Soto sect of Zen Buddhism from China to Japan. Without even a sketchy knowledge of the circumstances of Dogen's life that led him to become a Zen monk and to journey to China, where he attained the Great Way, one would find it difficult to understand the Soto Zen doctrine which forms the core of Yasutani Rashi's own teachings.
Born of an aristocratic family, Dogen even as a child gave evidence of his brilliant mind. It is related that at 4 he was reading Chinese poetry and at 9 a Chinese translation of a treatise on the Abhidharma. The sorrow he felt at his parents' deaths, his father when he was only 3 and his mother when he was 8, undoubtedly impressed upon his sensitive mind the impermanence of life and motivated him to become a monk. With his initiation into the Buddhist monkhood at an early age, he commenced his novitiate at Mount Hai, the center of scholastic Buddhism in medieval Japan, and for the next several years studied the Tendai doctrines of Buddhism. By his 15th year one burning question became the core around which his spiritual strivings revolved: if, as the Sutras say, our essential nature is bodhi, perfection, Why did all Buddhas have to strive for enlightenment and perfection? His dissatisfaction with the answers he received at Mount Hai led him eventually to Eisai Zenji, who had brought the teachings of the Rinzai sect of Zen Buddhism from China to Japan.
Eisai's reply to Dogen's question was, "No Buddha is conscious of its existence, that is, of this essential nature, while cats and oxen, that is, the grossly deluded, are aware of it. In other words, Buddhas, precisely because they are Buddhas, no longer think of having or not having a perfect nature, only the deluded think in such terms." At these words Dogen had an inner realization which dissolved his deep-seated doubt. In all likelihood this exchange took place in a formal encounter, dokusen, between Eisai and Dogen. It must be borne in mind that this problem had perplexed Dogen for some time, giving him no rest, and that all he needed was Eisai's words to trigger his mind into a state of enlightenment.
Dogen thereupon commenced what was to be a brief discipleship under Eisai, whose death took place within the year and who was succeeded by his eldest disciple, Myozan. During the 8 years Dogen spent with Myozan he passed a considerable number of koans and finally received Inka. Despite this accomplishment Dogen still felt spiritually unfulfilled, and this disquiet moved him to undertake the then hazardous journey to China in search of complete peace of mind. He stayed at all the well-known monasteries, practicing under many masters, but his longing for total liberation was unsatisfied. Eventually at the famous Tiantiang monastery, which had just acquired a new master, he achieved full awakening, that is, the liberation of body and mind, through these words uttered by his master, Ju Qing, "You must let fall body and mind."
These words are said to have been uttered by Ju Qing at the commencement of the formal Zazen period, in the early morning, as he was making his round of inspection. Spying one of the monks dozing, the master reprimanded him for his half-hearted effort. Then addressing all the monks, he continued, "You must exert yourselves with all your might, even at the risk of your lives. To realize perfect enlightenment you must let fall, that is, become empty of all conceptions of body and mind." As Dogen heard this last phrase his mind's eye suddenly expanded in a flood of light and understanding.
Later Dogen appeared at Ju Qing's room, lit a stick of incense, a ceremonial gesture usually reserved for noteworthy occasions, and prostrated himself before his master in the customary fashion. "Why are you lighting a stick of incense?" asked Ju Qing. Needless to say, Ju Qing, who was a first-rate master, and who had received Dogen many times in dokusen and therefore knew the state of his mind, could perceive at once from Dogen's walk, his prostrations, and the comprehending look in his eyes that he had had a great enlightenment. But Ju Qing undoubtedly wanted to see
what response this innocent-sounding question would provoke so as to fix the scope of Dogen's satori. "I have experienced the dropping off of body and mind," replied Dogen. Ju Qing exclaimed, "You have dropped body and mind have indeed dropped." But Dogen remonstrated, "Don't give me your sanction so readily. I am not sanctioning you so readily." Reversing their roles, Dogen demanded, "Show me that you are not readily sanctioning me." And Ju Qing repeated, "This is body and mind dropped, demonstrating." Whereupon Dogen prostrated himself again before his master as a gesture of respect and gratitude. "That's dropping dropped," added Ju Qing.
It is noteworthy that even with this profound experience Dogen continued his Zazen training in China for another 2 years before returning to Japan. At the time of his great awakening Dogen was practicing shikan-taza, a mode of Zazen which involved neither a koan nor counting or following the breaths. The very foundation of shikan-taza is an unshakable faith that sitting as the Buddha sat, with the mind void of all conceptions, of all beliefs and points of view, is the actualization or unfoldment of the inherently enlightened Bodhi mind with which all are endowed. At the same time this sitting is entered into in the faith that it will one day culminate in the sudden and direct perception of the true nature of this mind, in other words, enlightenment. Therefore to strive self-consciously for satori or any other gain from Zazen is as unnecessary as it is undesirable.
In authentic shikan-taza neither of these two elements of faith can be dispensed with. To exclude satori from shikan-taza would necessarily involve stigmatizing as meaningless and even masochistic the Buddha's strenuous efforts toward enlightenment, and impugning the ancestral teachers and Dogen's own painful struggles to that end. This relation of satori to shikan-taza is of the utmost importance. Unfortunately, it has often been misunderstood, especially by those to whom Dogen's complete writings are inaccessible. It thus not infrequently happens that Western students will come to a Soto temple or monastery utilizing koans in its teaching and remonstrate with the master over the assignment of a koan, on the ground that koans have as their aim enlightenment. Since all are intrinsically enlightened, they argue, there is no point in seeking satori. So what they ask to practice is shikan-taza, which they believe does not involve the experience of enlightenment.
Such an attitude reveals not only a lack of faith in the judgment of one's teacher but a fundamental misconception of both the nature and the difficulty of shikan-taza, not to mention the teaching methods employed in Soto temples and monasteries. A careful reading of these introductory lectures and Yasutani Rashi's encounters with 10 Westerners will make clear why genuine shikan-taza cannot be successfully undertaken by the rank novice, who has yet to learn how to sit with stability and equanimity, or whose ardor needs to be regularly boosted by communal sitting or by the encouragement of a teacher, or who, above all, lacks strong faith in his or her own Bodhi mind coupled with a dedicated resolve to experience its reality in one's daily life.
Because today, Zen masters claim, devotees are on the whole much less zealous for truth, and because the obstacles to practice posed by the complexities of modern life are more numerous, capable Soto masters seldom assign shikan-taza to a beginner. They prefer to have the student first unify the mind through concentration on counting the breaths, or where a burning desire for enlightenment does exist, to exhaust the discursive intellect through the imposition of a special type of Zen problem, that is, a koan, and thus prepare the way for Kensho.
By no means, then, is the koan system confined to the Rinzai sect as many believe. Yasutani Rashi is only one of a number of Soto masters who use koans in their teaching. Genshu Watanabe Rashi, the former abbot of Sojiji, one of the two head temples of the Soto sect in Japan, regularly employed koans, and at the Soto monastery of Hasinji, of which the illustrious Hirata Rashi was abbot during his lifetime, koans are also widely used.
Even Dogen himself, as we have seen, disciplined himself in koan Zen for 8 years before going to China and practicing shikan-taza. And though upon his return to Japan Dogen wrote at length about shikan-taza and recommended it for his inner band of disciples, it must not be forgotten that these disciples were dedicated truth seekers for whom koans were an unnecessary encouragement to sustained practice. Notwithstanding this emphasis on shikan-taza, Dogen made a compilation of 300 well-known koans, to each of which he added his own commentary. From this and the fact that his foremost work, the Shobogenzo, a treasury of the eye of the True Dharma, contains a number of koans, we may fairly conclude that he did utilize koans in his teaching.
Satori awakening as Dogen viewed it was not the be-all and end-all. Rather he conceived it as the foundation for a magnificent edifice whose many-storied superstructure would correspond to the perfected character and personality of the spiritually developed individual, the woman or man of moral virtue and all-embracing compassion and wisdom. Such an imposing structure, Dogen taught, could be erected only by years of faithful zazen upon the solid base of the immutable inner knowledge which Satori confers.
What then is zazen and how is it related to Satori? Dogen taught that zazen is the gateway to total liberation, and Kizun Zenji, one of the Japanese Soto Dharma ancestors, had declared that only through Zen sitting is the human mind illumined. Elsewhere Dogen wrote that even the Buddha, who was a born sage, sat in zazen for 6 years until his supreme enlightenment, and so towering a spiritual figure as Bodhidharma sat for 9 years facing the wall. And so have Dogen and all the other great masters sat.
For with the ordering and immobilizing of feet, legs, hands, arms, trunk, and head in the traditional lotus posture, with the regulation of the breath, the methodical stilling of the thoughts and unification of the mind through special modes of concentration, with the development of control over the emotions and strengthening of the will, and with the cultivation of a profound silence in the deepest recesses of the mind, in other words, through the practice of zazen, there are established the optimum preconditions for looking into the heart-mind and discovering there the true nature of existence.
Although sitting is the foundation of zazen, it is not just any kind of sitting. Not only must the back be straight, the breathing properly regulated, and the mind concentrated beyond thought, but, according to Dogen, one must sit with a sense of dignity and grandeur, like a mountain or a giant pine, and with a feeling of gratitude toward the Buddha and the Dharma ancestors, who made manifest the Dharma. And we must be grateful for our human body, through which we have the opportunity to experience the reality of the Dharma in all its profundity. This sense of dignity and gratitude, moreover, is not confined to sitting but must inform every activity, for insofar as each act issues from the Bodhi mind, it has the inherent purity and dignity of Buddhahood. This innate dignity of the human being is physiologically manifested in an erect back, since humans alone of all creatures have this capacity to hold their spinal columns vertical. An erect back is related to proper sitting in other important ways, which will be discussed at a later point in this section.
In the broad sense, Zazen embraces more than just correct sitting. To enter fully into every action with total attention and clear awareness is no less Zazen. The prescription for accomplishing this was given by the Buddha himself in an early sutra. In what is seen there must be just the seen, in what is heard there must be just the heard, in what is sensed, as smell, taste or touch, there must be just what is sensed, in what is thought there must be just the thought. The importance of single-mindedness, of bare attention, is illustrated in the following anecdote.
One day a man of the people said to Zen Master Ikkyu, "Master, will you please write for me some maxims of the highest wisdom?" Ikkyu immediately took his brush and wrote the word attention. "Is that all?" asked the man. "Will you not add something more?" Ikkyu then wrote twice running, "Attention? Attention." "Well," remarked the man rather irritably, "I really don't see much depth or subtlety in what you have just written."